And now, Chris, is it time for the panel Q&A?
It is.
And who will be the first?
So basically the way that we run this, so we will just need to have, yep, Kristen's on camera. Brian, if you could go on camera. I don't think, Carol, that you're going to be on camera. I will keep track of any questions that come in through the chat, but just like we did yesterday, everybody, feel free to raise your hand and I will let Carol know if you have a question. Meg Grant, Carol.
Okay, Meg, what's your question?
Hi, Carol. Those were really, really interesting presentations. Thanks, everyone. I have a question probably for everyone. It came up in Kristen's presentation where she's talking about how her team can iterate on the garment and the technology separately. And I'm wondering if everyone can talk a little bit about their process for version control and keeping those iterations current and documented and available to the whole team. It's maybe a little bit of a boring administrative topic, but it's something I'm really interested in. So perhaps people could share a few insights about that.
Yeah, I can start with that. I agree. I think this is really important, and I think over the years it's something that we have been getting a lot of improvement on through iterations and kind of training the team on how to do this. So it's really project dependent, the approach that we take. We do have our advanced manufacturing group actually has quality systems, and so we're able to leverage some of the folks over there to kind of help us, like, hey, do you have a simplified version of a process that we can use, or a tracking process? That's kind of one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is basically you know, using Excel sheets. I mean, it doesn't have to be super fancy. You know, you could basically track through that with a shared Excel sheet. And make sure that you have relevant categories, that everyone is on the same page as far as what you need to do. We have leads depending on the aspect of that program. So in this particular case, we had a kind of a garment lead, the liaison with Clemson, and then we had an electronics lead, a software lead, and then our encapsulation. And each of those were responsible for that iteration, and we had a common language so that the encapsulation folks knew how to speak to the Flexboard folks, and so that way you had some crossover and good communication there. But you know, nothing too fancy here, just a good Excel sheet with a huge amount of detail so everyone can go back and be able to see, like, okay, well, this is unit 9, and these were the different encapsulation steps, or these are the software that was loaded onto this particular sensor, or something like that. So, you know, nothing earth-shattering, but it seems to work pretty well for us.
Yeah, that sounds pretty familiar, and also building your own system. But the idea of a common language between the different teams from different disciplines on the same thing, that seems to be really key.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great.
This is Brian. So I'll actually, I have painful memories actually of doing it wrong. Back in 2016, we were like 2 years into the company, and we actually were approached by a med device company on a physiological monitoring product. And ultimately we got through engineering, had a statement of work and a program approved, and got to the next gate, which was their quality and supply chain, and that gate ended rather quickly. So we literally didn't proceed. So we've learned from that. We actually, I think a big part of it is hiring, right? So engineers, you know, they do great work. You know, I'm an engineer myself, but you know, that side of the business, the whole quality system side, just got to hire the right people. Same thing on the program management side. So that has actually been one of the biggest challenges as a small business, is having your systems scale to keep up with your business, especially, you know, sometimes growing too fast and not keeping up is difficult. But then, you know, there's the funding thing. Is as lucrative as SBIRs are, as Carol and Claire described. I mean, you know, they are not, you know, sometimes cash flow can be challenging, especially in the early days. So I think, you know, hiring the right people, you know, we've been fortunate now over the last year to be able to do that, to get a program management office in place. We're working right now with a external quality system company actually to get AS 9100 and 13485, which is kind of the med device equivalent from a quality standard system in place.
Yeah, I'd echo what Brian has said, and we've known each other a long time and worked on different projects over the years. I mean, it's when you're a small business, cash flow is really important, and even within the contracts, within SBIR contracts, sometimes your cash flow is not what you want it to be. And I had a situation earlier this year where, because a contracting officer hadn't entered something correctly that I couldn't even see, I couldn't get paid for 4 months. So that was kind of a nightmare. And but it's not the only nightmare I've had over the years. So, you know, you've got the same, just because you're getting paid by the government doesn't mean it's going to be easier than collecting from private businesses. It's probably as difficult. And I'm not saying that we haven't had great experiences, because we have, but I would also say that, you know, scaling is very important. Thinking ahead in your systems so that when you get to that size, the system is already in place, because it's really difficult to shift from one to another. To go back to your original question about iterations, essentially, as you go through and making sure everybody's on the same page. That goes, the tracking system that you're using and how people are accessing that and what they're allowed to put up to make changes, and how you can, you know, a system that allows you to see who made that change and when it was made is really, really critical to knowing what's happened, because people, everybody, I mean, makes mistakes. And so you want to be able to go back and identify what happened. And then simple labeling. Every garment should get a label on it. And that's even more important with SBIRs, because you have to label everything you send to the government.
How much does qualified domestic supply chain play into the contracts?
I can, from our point of view, well, the electronic components for I mean, I'm quoting the language in Berry, not normally associated with textiles, currently are not required to be Berry. But that phrase, not normally, is one of concern to those of us in the textile field, because when will they be normally associated? So we at Propel try to start with Berry compliant from the beginning, because we have experienced, and this goes back to issues that can come up later, like the quality issue, etc. But if you try to change something later on, because you were buying something offshore and now it must be Berry compliant, and you can't do it, you've failed, and your whole project could fail. So we try to make every single component Berry compliant from the beginning.
So, but it sounds like this is going to be an issue because it seems like there's some ambiguity, correct? So it's something that's not going to easily, more readily go away.
Right. And there's another thing that's overlaying it, and I'd be interested to hear what Kristen and Brian have to think about this, which is something that all contractors working for DoD are going to have to, we have to comply with something called NIST 800 now,
Yep.
which is cybersecurity. But the new program that's coming in, the CMMC, is about more than that. And it's really about national security. And so to the extent that if we're working on a DoD product that is about national security, that you really have to think about these things as well, even if Berry didn't exist. But then I had one of the battery people say to me recently, they always say that they want US manufacturing, but in the end, they'll buy the cheapest thing. And so, you know, the batteries aren't necessarily all domestic that are being used by DoD. I'd really love the other two to comment on that, though.
Yeah, I think I would echo what Claire says. I mean, it starts with Barry is the big one, and you know, for the most part, I mean, honestly, even a reality of the DoD market is that a lot of times your volumes, like in soldier systems, for example, 1,000 systems is a big order, and you know, even if there were advantages, you know, better technology overseas, you know, honestly, the volumes don't even warrant you doing that, because it's just you generally the return isn't there, and honestly, the technologies are available. I mean, one of the things that has been very interesting is, like, you know, Kristen actually did a very good job outlining, you know, how you're successful in this area. So the management of the supply chain, you know, working with within the design rules of the electronics industry, within the design rules of the apparel industry, and kind of almost working them independently and bringing them together. The electronics industry, there are a lot of great partners that we work with, but I think we're just another customer. Whereas the apparel industry and the textiles industry, you know, coming to them with some of this, I mean, there's just a real passion and excitement around this kind of work, because I think they realize these technologies are what's going to keep the US textile industry relevant and moving forward. So I mean, that's been some of our experience.
Kristen, did you have a response as well?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with Claire and Brian. There are a lot of challenges with that particular requirement, especially on the electronic side. So, you know, having to select certain components or work with certain companies, that's very much a challenge. And obviously, we know a lot of that stuff is overseas, so you have to somewhat limit, or you have to find those entities in the U.S. That you can work with. And you do pay more for it, and I think that was something that that both parties brought up is you know, it's in some ways it's not the cheapest. So on the battery front, so this is an area within CRG that you know, we have a power and energy center that's really focused on the batteries, and we're actually working on standing up manufacturing of our cells in the US to be another option, because they were just banging their heads against the wall for one of their programs where there's just not a lot of choice in the US for cell manufacturing. So we said, well, we have some new technologies, and let's go ahead and set up that cell production here. So I know not super useful information, but I guess I can kind of sympathize with all of you in the sense that sometimes this is a challenge, but I think obviously this is a good challenge, and I think that you know, we want to be able to continue to have this expertise and these options in the U.S. So, but yeah, you know, we're working through it, but it is a challenge.
So I know, Carol, you and Stephanie and I have talked about this before, and about the possibility of how standards can help in this area. Is that, you see a role there? Stephanie?
Definitely. I think that there are tremendous opportunities in this space, you know, for additional standards. I think that the portfolio of standards that have already been approved and the ones that are underway under IPC are really outstanding. And as we go forward, you know, I see the continuation of additional development of more standards to address these broad areas of concern.
So I'm going to jump in on one more thing. I think, Stephanie, it looks like you have a question, but I just want to get this one out. So Claire, building off of the trusted supplier thing you talked about, especially with the NIST standard and CMMC coming out pretty soon. So IPC was actually approached by the executive agent, this is probably about 2.5 or 3 years ago, to develop a trusted supplier program for the electronics manufacturing industry. I'm going to send that document to you, and I'd like to have you take a look at it, because it's a checklist that the DoD is going to expect for anybody who's manufacturing electronics, designing electronics, or the materials for the electronics to meet that. It's focused on circuit board and assemblies because that's, you know, where the bulk of our committee work is. But it's right now they're looking to expand it for wire and cable harness. And so that's kind of, it's not a direct fit with e-textiles, but we're starting to kind of get there. But I think there's something that would probably be interest to others who are looking at, you know, working with the Department of Defense.
Yeah, I think we could all benefit with that document.
Well, and we do have an audit program set up around it, and it's, you know, it's getting a lot of popular. And it really is. It's pretty much, here's a checklist of things you're supposed to, you know, that you should do, and it deals with quality, it deals with traceability, deals with security aspects. I mean, we got into I remember on one of the committee discussions, got into a huge debate on whether or not you needed to have an FBI channeler to do a background check on somebody, because some small businesses wouldn't even be able to afford to do that. I think there was a thing with the state of California, you know, standard stuff, everything goes to negotiations. But I think that there could probably be something of interest there for you. And that would go for Brian, Kristen, Carol, yeah, I think because you're on the DoD side, we have to take a look at that one as well, because this is something that the textiles committee can take and modify for this industry, even if it helps. I don't care if it helps 2 companies. You know, if it helps, then it's something we should aspire to do.
Yeah, well, we're
Okay.
using traceability on the Berry side. We have to do that now. I have to, any product I sell to the government, I've got to have full traceability in my files. So seeing it for the electronic side would be great, very helpful.
So we actually have a traceability document as well. It's traceability at the surface mount for printed circuit boards level. But again, just like we did with the other IPC standards, you've got the guts and you've got the bones that are there, that are the parts that are important. What's, you know, you just take like what's applicable to our industry and what's not, and then you can create your own standard. So I'd be happy. I'll tell you what, if Claire, definitely, I know that Carol, I think you would be interested, but if anybody's interested in getting a sneak peek at those documents, let me know. You know, they're published standards, so I can give, you know, people maybe a couple of weeks to look at it from the standpoint of looking at any interest that you would have in trying to develop something similar for this industry.
Great. All right, so I did want to mention a few things. One is that I was fascinated with all of the presentations. Thank you so very much. Very informative with the design, develop, deliver type methodology. And then of course, adding the layer of complexity of working with the DoD or through government systems. The interesting thing for me is that I think there is opportunity in resource development to help companies through a type of standard or another guideline with IPC and transition it around e-textiles, because this again was very validating for me, because my position was really founded on working through a government system, which is a FOA, and then networking that through DoD and research and development escalation. So I think, you know, similarly, and then from that we've expanded through SBIR and STTR programs. So I think that it's a great approach, especially in this arena that's so focused on a specific niche that can really expand out greatly. And it's obviously there's several testaments just right here in front of us that are success factors in this area. So Chris and Carol, Claire, I think it would be great to get together and put some kind of guideline together that just helps remind people about Berry. From the electronic side, it might be something that they don't ever think of. And there's a lot of confidentiality in this business as we communicate with each other. And it might something that just the electronic side and communicating to the textile side didn't really think about it, hadn't considered it might be a military use, and don't start at the right point. And then like Claire mentioned, it really can throw things very much off track if you have to change later. So you know, just simple points like that I think would be well mentioned in addition to all of the inroads. The presentation from Claire and Carol, that in and of itself would be interesting information for people to be able to attain.
Great, thank you. And I think that So going to say that there are a few follow-on activities that we can take, from this particular session, and go forward and continue this momentum.
So I will tell you what, I will connect with, definitely, it would be Carol and Claire and Stephanie. But did Kristen and Brian, did you have any interest in participating in some discussions about this?
Yeah, I think that would be great.
Absolutely.
Okay. And to others who are on the call, don't feel like you're left out. I mean, anything that we do from a standards or a collaborative perspective is open to anybody to participate. So if you have any interest in what we're going to talk about, which we'll report back to people what we start to come up with. But if you want to participate in the discussions, please let us know, because like I said, anything that we do from a collaborative perspective is open to anybody. You just may end up with an action item, that's all. So Carol, I think then, unless there's any other questions, I don't see any other question. Oh, wait, actually we have Vigi has.
Vignesh, sorry guys. So,
Hi, how are you?
Hey, love the talks. Just had a quick question with respect to your defense projects. Are there any specific constraints in terms of the electronic components you use? Does that similar to the wool grown on American sheep? Is there like some semiconductor? Does the same apply to semiconductors and stuff you use in your projects?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, we can use electronics that are produced overseas because they're not considered textiles per se. But as Claire and others have alluded to, because we are developing e-textiles, meaning some of these electronics are being translated into textile form, that the question is, where is that line? So to answer your question, the traditional hard electronics, it's okay. I mean, if we are going to be using them, if they come from overseas. So they are, as far as I know, they are not really a part of the Berry Amendment. But again, as Claire stated, it's probably better if you can get those components in the U.S. first.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was just going to say, to add to that, I mean, some of these components are difficult to source domestically, but there are plenty of board assemblers, board fabricators in the U.S. And so that's pretty critical to make sure that at least your board fab is done in the U.S.
I see.
Yeah. And there are, I mean, again, I agree. There electronics. There isn't really a lot of restrictions, but there are definitely some companies I know from personal experience, even in the last month. I mean, we're doing a system, and we were just advised by a customer that there was a list of companies that we cannot procure a part from. And you've probably all seen these in the news, but like Huawei, ZTE, Hytera. So there's a list. I'd be happy to follow up after if at least what was shared to us as an initial do not use list.
And I actually had my contracts modified last week with that list in it. That's the first time I've seen that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and I think it also includes not only the electronics in your prototypes and devices, but anything you're using on the program that may have data. So like if you have emails going through your phone and that phone was manufactured by one of those companies, it's a no-go. If you're taking pictures or something, it sounds like everything, just avoid those companies, any sort of equipment, electronics, don't use them in any aspect of your programs.
right.
I had a question for Brian. Sorry, I'm not sure how to raise hand, so I've kind of typed it in the chat, but hello?
Yeah, go ahead. I can hear you.
So could you please elaborate a little bit about the ECG vest in your presentation? How are the connections made or integrated in this garment? Is there conductive yarn woven inside or cables hidden somewhere? Just want to know about that particular garment.
Yeah. So I mean, the one I showed basically was e-textile. It was the narrow fabric e-textile that I showed in the presentation. Connections, actually, that's definitely one of the big areas, and I know Chris and the team at IPC have been working for that for a long time in terms of how to better automate. Bring some connection standards that are, kind of mirror what happens in the PCBA or in the semiconductor packaging standards, and bringing that to e-textile. So, we're doing some things there to try to automate. But, a lot of times it's, if it's a conductive textile, which in this case it was, you're using conductive epoxies. We do a lot actually even with integrating highly stranded copper or copper alloy wires, and they're might be soldering to a PCB as an interface. So one of the challenges with a lot of the conductive yarns, there are definitely applications where they can be used, heating being a good example. But if you get into any kind of a complex network, you're just limited, and you have to go to a more conventional wiring. So in this case, it actually was more of an insulated wire.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Ona has a question.
Hi, thank you for all the presentation. I think my question could be to all three. I was wondering, in the military field, is there more interest to improve kind of existing functions on a system that the soldier wears, for example, to make it lighter or more comfortable? Or is there more interest to add additional new functions to the system? Or is it more like an equal mix of both?
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. No, why don't you, Brian?
I mean, from our experience, I think it's a little bit about it. Definitely right now, I think there's more on all of the soldier modernization programs that we've been involved in. I think there's a need to make some of the existing systems better. Again, I talked about e-textiles and the opportunities there, and Carol gave some great examples in her presentation where cable management, that has been the #1 challenge, and continues to be for a lot of these programs. So making that better, and I think until you act, because if you think about it, they're kind of creating the network today for a limited set of devices. But I think until you actually solve the network, adding more functionality just makes what is already kind of a complicated mess more complicated. So I think that core personal area network is really kind of a lot of the focus, and a lot of champions like Carol within the development side of the Army is really kind of lasered in there. But a lot of interesting new capabilities that will come to bear over time as well.
I think one of the things that affects the work at the SBIR level and then all the way through is the changes in the DoD's areas of operation. So, for example, a few years ago, there was a big shift to jungle, and we were going to be doing more jungle warfare. So from the clothing point of view, not talking about the electronics, because that's really kind of crosses over it, you've got to go lighter, more breathable, but you still want the same durability. So we're seeing that on the other side in a lot of interest in cold weather, extreme cold weather protection. So the garment that we did under the phase 3 program for the Army that took from our first phase 2 on stitchless technology is for the cold temperature Arctic protection system that's under development right now as a new wet weather layer. And by taking bulk and weight out of that garment and adding functionality, more pockets or whatever it is, they could put more insulation into other parts of the system. So, and keep the same weight overall or even reduce it. So there's a very much, Brian touched on it, it's very much a systems approach, and you've got to have the whole system working together, but the operational need does change over time. And then our project on the active heat boot, there we're bringing e-textiles, printed flexible electronics, battery issues into a boot that may be on somebody that gets stranded in extreme cold temperatures for a long period of time. So you've got to keep a knowledge base going of what the DoD needs are that are overarching as well as specific to your project.
Yeah, and I think the only thing that I have to add there is it depends on the DoD agency. So certain agencies want more near-term solutions, so they're more practical. You know, they want something that can be fielded in the next few years versus, you know, you have an agency like DARPA, for example, that is maybe more willing to take some risks and you know, puts solicitations or puts concepts out there for, you know, something they want decades later that's just crazy out there technology. So I think it kind of depends, and it's you know, it kind of varies throughout the agencies.
You make a very good point. I've seen a big shift. The Navy is our primary customer, just seems to have been that way. We've done other services as well. And we've seen a big shift even within the SBIR. They want it structured so that you've got a deliverable in phase 2 after 6 months. Mm-hmm. And it's a 2-year program. Other services haven't made that shift.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
And that shift is not obvious unless you stay on top of the mindset of what's going on by attending meetings and talking to people and listening to people. It's not in the SBIR guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. Very good answers from all of you.
Viggy, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I keep disturbing these things, but I had a quick question because the topic of body sensor networks got brought up. So how keen is the armed forces with respect to adopting body sensor networks versus aggregating all the sensing from the different parts of the body and having it go to a box? I know Brian's presentation touched on it, but do you think there's like any potential for wireless body sensing networks in the discrete forms?
Yeah, I mean, I think there definitely are. I mean, we even know customers who are looking at wireless. I think your question was wireless versus wired, or broad personal area, body area network.
So having the individual sensing components, having them be independent and send the information wireless, versus aggregating all of the information together in the body. So I was just wondering.
Yeah. So I think the biggest challenge with that. So if you look at in the DoD, you know, I mentioned in my presentation. So for example, on the soldier system side, the smartphone is the core computer, but it's really just a computer. I mean, at all of these programs, they disable all communications functions because so you have to have secure wireless. And right now, there was one large company that got out of it, but there's really just one option now, and it's not even qualified by the NSA. So a lot of the secure wireless solutions that are out there that aren't even qualified, they're just very, very large. So specifically for a DoD application, I would say the size, weight, and power of the individual wireless nodes is just too big, even before you put any sensing functionality there. So I think that's going to be a significant challenge for the foreseeable future with regards to wireless body area networks.
I see. Thank you.
Which is good for e-textiles, right?
Carol, I don't see any other hands up or questions in the chat.
Right. And so I think that we're running a little over time, right? So should we wrap things up?
Sure.
Okay, so thanks everyone, especially the speakers for their presentations. I think they were all outstanding and really gave us a good idea of how to be successful in the SBIR program and doing business with the military. So thanks again, everyone.